Hi guys, welcome to Creative Making. My name's Pete, and in this video I'm going to be looking at an amazing kit from Bigbangcollectables of the snub-nosed PKD blaster from Blade Runner. Well, here we go. So this kit is from Bigbangcollectables, designed and created by Colin Catchpole. I believe Colin only did 10 copies of this kit. He no longer does them, which is a real shame because it's a fantastic kit, and as you'll see through this video, goes together and creates a beautiful end result. So I'm just looking at the parts here. They're all, well, not all of them, most of them are resin printed. They're all printed hollow to a really good standard. So all the parts that you need for it there, I did augment it with a few extra bits and bobs that weren't included in the kit, bolts and things like that. But yeah, it's really cool. So, as Adam Savage likes to do, let's null this puppy. So all the parts that you need, as I say, are there. That lighting kit that you see towards the bottom there is an extra that I bought a while back. I'm just going to quickly put this together so we can have a look at kind of what it looks like. Some of the main parts do screw on and bolt on, which is great. When it comes to actually assembling this, I will glue some of the parts together as well. But as you can see, majority of these parts will bolt on. Kind of functional in the fact that the magazine comes out, the cylinder there rotates, and the side of that cylinder opens up. And as you can see, it's a really great size as well. It's not a tiny little kind of inverted commas toy replica. So there you go, that's it together. So the first thing I need to do obviously is to go through all these parts and make sure everything's cleaned up. This particular part is the first part that I looked at, and there was a part that I noticed there was some liquid coming out of a crack and realised that there was still some uncured resin inside, so I pulled it off. This is the part I'm talking about. Pulled it off and cleaned the resin out and popped the thing in my UV curing station. And now that's all ready, I just need to fit that back on. Make sure it's all nice and seamless. To do that then I just used my little mini Dremel, sanded the edges so it's all nice and rough to take the glue better. I mean, these parts will glue beautifully well with super glue anyway, but I just wanted to make sure that they were mega glued, that they weren't going to come off or shift. So I sanded those down, I glued that on, then using a little bit of auto filler, I filled in the tiny little gaps. Just used a little bit of 320 grit sandpaper there just to tidy everything up and make sure all the edges were smooth before I glued it together. So you can see here the part is glued on and filled. I didn't bother filming it, you know what filling and sanding looks like. But you can see it's all glued together and filled. At that point I thought, yeah, that's great, but then I realised that when I put this part in that there was a big step. Actually there was a step on both sides, just there. So I need to kind of add filler onto it so it matches that height. So in order to do that, I'm going to mask off this part using packing tape. And the reason I do this is because the car body filler won't stick to the packing tape, which is really cool, and that packing tape is mega thin. I could use, I don't know, Vaseline or something like that, but it's messy. You never know whether you're going to get it fully covered. So this packing tape is something that I've used a lot when I was working in architectural model making, and it works really well. And then basically once this packing tape is on and trimmed, I'll just mix up a little bit of the auto filler and squish it all together. Give that a good thorough mix then. This stuff stinks, so make sure you've got extraction. Smear it all over the edges where you want it to be fitted properly, and then put it together and squeeze. And then fill in that step. Now the packing tape only goes on the side you don't want the filler to stick to. So we'll leave that overnight and then just trim it up. Pull that apart. And then, and then just go for it with sandpapers. Just, you know, your usual sanding regime. Starting off with fairly rough, working your way down. I didn't really film much of this. Again, sanding and filling is not that exciting. And there you go. It all looks nice and neat, and there's no weird step. This is the magazine, I believe. It's actually where the lighting kit is going to go. I need to cut this bit out here. This lighting kit is for a full-sized Blade Runner blaster, and this of course isn't, so there's a little less space than you would normally have. So thankfully Colin had modelled this and printed it hollow, so there was areas that I could cut out using my little cut-off wheel. And now there's plenty of space there for the battery and all the wires and bits and bobs. So let's take a look at the main frame of the gun. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take a look at the grip. This big flat area here, I'm going to end up chopping that out so it's a bit more like the original blaster. So before I do that, I'm just going to mark out where the grips go. By hand, I'm just going to mark where I want this hole. Essentially, I'm just going to cut a hole out of there. And I'm kind of using the existing widths just to sort of roughly mark that. And then we're going to cut that out. So I'm going to just drill a load of holes. You don't need me to explain this, you can see it. But I'm going to drill a load of holes. Did a few more, and then once they're drilled, just push it out. And it's only then that I realised this part was FDM printed or filament printed, but that's fine. It keeps it lightweight, and yeah, I think if it was resin it would be too brittle. And I'm just going to take my Permagrit files and just get all that cleaned up. And again, I didn't bother filming too much of it because it's boring, but I filed it and then I filled it. Also went around the edge a little bit, but we'll go back to that again in a second. We'll get a look at this bit in a bit. We'll get a look at this bit soon, but it was only now that I realised that the pin on there was a little bit warped. Anyway, we'll look at that in a bit. Here I've put the grips onto the frame and I've realised there's a bit of a step. So, I mean, it would have probably been fine, but I wanted to try and sort that out. So I've bolted the grips to the frame, and as you can see, I'm just blasting my little Dremel around it, trying to get it all even and level. When I thought I was right. Once I'd done this, obviously I wet and dry sandpaper and I sanded all the edges so it was smooth and nice and kind of polished that up. Again, there's a lot of this I didn't film because watching me sand and fill and sand and fill is pretty boring. So cold. Yeah, I know what you're about. Your love don't show. Memories you threw it out. Now I'm so froze. Cause you're slipping around. I used a lot of these sanding stick. Pretty much most of these went. Lights down low. Rolling around town with a broken soul. Got you running back with your eyes all swollen. Burning like coal with a superstar. So they're the grips all tidied up. You can see they're a bit dull. I will kind of polish those later on. And there's the handle. Now, just to add a little bit more interest, I wanted to put this steel bar up through the handle there. Don't ask me why, just felt right. As this is filament printed, it's super easy to drill. Once I got the hole drilled, the bar fitted nice. I just needed to tidy one end up, and then I needed to mark it and cut it to the right length. Just used a file there to mark it. Got the big Dremel out for this one. That little one's cool, but it's just not strong enough for big jobs like this. There we go, sort of just roughly put together, but you kind of get the idea. It doesn't look that much different, to be honest. Okay, so let's have a look at this funny little bit at the side. I think it's meant to be a sight. On the original prop, it was made out of a jeweler's screwdriver. At each end, it's a tube, essentially. It's a hollow tube, and at each end there's a green LED. Now that lighting kit that I have just to the side there only has the red LEDs, but I wanted to get this set up so the LEDs worked on this part. So I kind of ummed and ahed and thought about it for a little bit, and then thought, you know what, just go for it. So yeah, again, a lot of boring footage. But there's me almost drilling through my finger. So I drilled the holes, soldered the LEDs, fed the wires through, and then I had to make sure it all fitted on there like that, and then I could run the wires from there down to this side. A little bit of me wiring things and doing stuff wrong. Anyway, I got it done. Here it is. Not an easy job, but I ended up eventually taking those fat wires off, and I ended up using magnet wire. The bullet that I made. You can see here when this cylinder goes onto that pin, when you close the pin, the cylinder's kind of cockeyed, it's off to one side, and that's probably because I've had these parts for a couple of years now and they've warped. So what I decided that I wanted to do is to take that pin off and replace it with a metal one. On this part here, I'm just kind of explaining that I wanted to remove that oval and replace it with a Steyr logo. Steyr are the company that made the gun that the original blaster was made out of. So yeah, you can see there that I've filled in one of the holes because there is only one red light underneath that, and I replaced that just plain oval with that Steyr 3D logo that I found on Thingiverse. Let's have a bit of a tidy up. It's getting a bit messy. Okay, so let's just get all the parts together. There's a lot of this, as I say, I didn't bother filming. There's just a lot of sanding and filling and sanding, which is pretty boring. But these are all the parts pretty much ready to paint, actually. So we've looked at these, well, we've looked at all these parts before, but yeah, they're all cleaned up, ready to go. Let's have a look at this bit then. So as I mentioned, this pin is wonky. I tried to warm it up in hot water and bend it back, but I couldn't. So I've decided that I'm going to replace it with some of this brass rod. So I found a bit of brass rod which is more or less the same size. It's a little bit wider. But the good thing with this is it's got thick walls on the rod, and one of these bolts here kind of cuts its own thread. So I do need a retaining bolt for the cylinder to not keep falling off. So we'll cut this off. And then using my little Dremel pillar drill, we'll get a nice vertical hole. Just going to drill that through quickly. And then we'll obviously give that a bit of a sand, make it all nice and smooth. That hole's big enough to get a bolt through, but not big enough for the brass tube to pull through. We'll just quickly screw that on. All I need to do now is to just Dremel out a little bit there so the bolt head is level with the surface, and cut the tube to length, and there we go, all done. There we go, so we can see the tube and the bolt and the bits and bobs. Nice, job done. Before I start thinking about painting this, I'm just going to give this whole thing a once over with these sanding pads. Got these from the Maker Central website, and they're for polishing acrylic pens, I believe. And they're just 3 sponges, and there's a different grade of grit on each sponge. Gave everything a clean those letters out, and just give the whole thing a wet sand all over, nice and smooth. Once everything was wet sanded, I gave them all a bath in warm soapy water. A lot of these parts were printed hollow, which I didn't really think about at the time. Once I'd given them all a clean with warm soapy water, this just gets rid of lots of residue and release agents and grease and all that. But once they were all cleaned, I chucked them all into a bucket of cold plain water, rinsed off all the soap and left them to dry. There we go, all nice and clean, ready for painting. Well, they would be if I didn't keep handling them with my bare hands. These pieces I'm going to give a lot more of a polish, and I'll gloss those as well. I noticed that the grip on the right hand side of the frame there was a bit of a gap towards the top, so I decided to use the same trick as I used previously. Covered the grip in brown packing tape, mixed up a ton of this stuff. Again, it's the Auto Carb Body Filler. Smeared that where there was a bit of a indiscretion in the fit, and then once I got that all smeared on, I put the grip on and then bolted that in place. Also did a bit more, just a little bit of filling around the edges. So once that had cured, not long, 20 minutes if that, I popped off the grip and gave everything a nice final sand and a final clean up. So there we go, some of the parts are already painted. These are satin black. everything else will be metallic. So I painted those first using Halford's satin black, the best satin black in my opinion. All the metallics I'm going to use Alclad paints. Never used them before, but they're great. So here are some of the metals I tried. So this one is polished aluminium. This is just normal aluminium, they look the same to me. And these other parts are chrome. There we go, they're chrome. Really shiny, really reflective paints. Now this piece, I thought this was the best. All the others are too bright, and this is a mixture of polished aluminium, chrome, and a little bit of the gunmetal. It looked purple, which is very weird. So I went ahead and painted everything. There's also glossed the grips there. Everything's painted metallic. If you haven't used the Alclad stuff before, then definitely give it a try. You can see the bullets in there as well. So let's start putting this together. I'm going to use tacky glue to glue most of this together. Tacky glue is just a thick, sticky PVA. It cures clear and it's easy to clean off if you get it anywhere. I was going to use super glue. Super glue can frost, and epoxy, even 5-minute epoxy for me is a little bit too slow. So there we go. So we're putting it all together. Bolting stuff where it needs to be bolted, gluing things where they need to be glued. Get those final grips on. It looks great with those grips on. Really happy. Okay, so this part is probably quite difficult to see, but I'm actually, at this point, I'm starting to fit the LEDs. First thing I did was to glue the switch in, and then carefully using a pair of tweezers, popping the LEDs in where they needed to go with a bit of tacky glue. And now this is the part with the screwdriver. As I mentioned before, I've put on some copper magnet wire, which is super thin wire. It's covered in like a lacquer, but if you scrape the lacquer off, you can use it as a conductive wire. Really fiddly this, so you probably can't really see what's going on. But anyway, cutting the wires to length, and eventually I soldered those wires, the copper magnet wires, onto the original circuit for the red lights. It would have been really nice to have done this, I don't know, maybe using magnets, so when I closed the cylinder cover the green lights came on. But yeah, so a bit of solder. I'm not an electronics person, I can't solder, but anyway, it worked in the end. It looked great. So we're just going to go all Adam Savage, and we're going to weather this up using oil paints and doing an oil wash. So these oil paints are mixed with a little bit of white spirit. We're just daubing it all over the place and then using paper towels to clean that off. Ties everything together. You know, once you've done this, even though it might not look super old, it just brings all the surface texture, the specularity, the shine on the plastic and on the metal, and just ties the whole thing together. I think once this was done, I was really, really happy with it. To put some muck on the grips as well, and we're pretty much there. So now we've got the grips done, we've bolt those on, and we're all happy. So anyway, so let's have a look at the beauty shots. Okay guys, well, thanks very much for watching. If you've got this far, I really appreciate it. If you haven't already done so, please consider subscribing and clicking that bell for more videos. I've got quite a lot planned for the future. Just wanted to say a massive thank you to Colin Catchpole, who is the guy that owns Big Bang Collectables. He does some amazing stuff. If you haven't had a look at his stuff, then check him out in the links below. Thanks a lot guys. See you on the next video.